When people talk about the Amazon, they often imagine a single continuous stretch of rainforest, an unbroken green mass somewhere near the equator. In reality, what we call the Amazon is not one clearly defined place, but a vast region whose boundaries depend on how closely you choose to look. It stretches across the northern half of South America, centered around the equatorial belt, but its influence reaches far beyond what most maps can easily show. The Amazon is shaped less by lines on paper and more by water, elevation, and time. Geographically, the Amazon occupies a basin, a shallow continental depression formed over millions of years, into which countless rivers slowly converge. This basin spreads across parts of 9 modern countries, including Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Brazil contains the largest portion, both of the forest itself and of the river system that drains it, but the Amazon does not belong to any single nation in an ecological sense. Rivers cross borders without hesitation, rainfall patterns ignore political divisions, and animal migrations follow food and water rather than jurisdiction. From the air, the forest appears seamless, yet on the ground it subtly changes character as soil composition, elevation, and water availability shift from place to place. At the center of this region flows the Amazon River, carrying more water than any other river on Earth. It begins high in the Andes Mountains of western South America, though the exact source has been debated for decades, and travels eastward for thousands of kilometers before reaching the Atlantic Ocean. Along its path, it gathers water from an immense network of tributaries, many of them rivers in their own right, some wider than major rivers elsewhere in the world. Together, these waterways define the Amazon basin, an area far larger than the rainforest alone. This distinction matters. The Amazon rainforest is the forested portion of the basin, the dense, humid ecosystem that has become symbolic of the region. The Amazon basin, by contrast, includes everything the river system drains: forests, wetlands, savannas, seasonal floodplains, and even areas of open grassland. In some places, especially toward the southern and eastern edges, forest gives way gradually to drier ecosystems. These transitions are not abrupt. Trees thin slowly, species composition shifts, and rainfall patterns change over hundreds of kilometers. The Amazon rainforest is therefore not a single uniform block of trees, but a mosaic of habitats shaped by water, climate, and geology. Understanding this distinction helps explain why the Amazon can be so difficult to grasp when viewed on a map. Satellite images flatten the region into a single shade of green, concealing the complexity beneath. Elevation changes are subtle and rarely visible from above. Rivers appear as thin lines, even though some are several kilometers wide during the rainy season. Seasonal flooding, which transforms large portions of the forest into temporary wetlands, is invisible in a still image. What looks static from space is, in reality, constantly in motion. Maps also struggle to convey scale. The Amazon basin covers an area comparable to the continental United States, yet it often appears compressed when displayed alongside other regions. This compression makes it easy to underestimate distances. Traveling from one side of the basin to the other can take days by river, even with modern boats. Many communities remain accessible only by water or small aircraft, not because of remoteness in a traditional sense, but because rivers are still the most reliable pathways through the forest. Roads are scarce, and where they do exist, they often follow the edges rather than cutting through the heart of the basin. Another reason the Amazon is difficult to understand visually is that its defining features are layered rather than spread out. Much of What matters happens vertically. Trees rise tens of meters above the ground, forming multiple levels of habitat stacked one above the other. Beneath the canopy, light diminishes rapidly, and the forest floor receives only a fraction of the sunlight visible from above. Below the soil surface, roots, fungi, and microorganisms form networks that rarely appear in descriptions, yet are essential to the forest's survival. None of this depth is visible on a map. The equator passes through the northern portion of the basin, and while latitude plays a role in shaping climate, it does not fully explain the Amazon's conditions. Elevation, proximity to the Andes, and the sheer volume of water moving through the system all contribute to local variation. Some parts of the basin receive rain almost daily, while others experience more pronounced dry periods. These differences influence which plant and animal species can survive in each area, further fragmenting the idea of a single uniform rainforest. Even the word rainforest can be misleading. It suggests a place defined primarily by rainfall, yet the Amazon is equally defined by rivers that flood and retreat with the seasons. Large areas of forest are submerged for months each year, creating environments where trees have adapted to survive with their roots underwater. Other areas remain dry, even during the rainy season, and support entirely different communities of plants and animals. From above, these forests may look identical, but on the ground they function in very different ways. Human perception adds another layer of confusion. For centuries, explorers, scientists, and travelers described the Amazon based on limited experience, often confined to riverbanks or specific regions. These accounts shaped popular understanding, but they could not capture the full extent of variation across such a vast area. Even today, much of what we know comes from scattered research sites, each representing only a small portion of the basin. The Amazon as a whole remains too large to be observed all at once. Political maps further complicate the picture. Borders drawn during colonial periods divided the basin into territories that reflect historical claims rather than ecological realities. Rivers that serve as national boundaries in some places continue uninterrupted beyond those borders, carrying sediment, nutrients, and aquatic life across lines that exist only on paper. Indigenous territories, often spanning large areas, overlap with these borders, adding yet another layer to the human geography of the region. When all of these factors are considered together, the Amazon becomes less a place that can be pointed to and more a system that must be understood over time. It is defined by movement, of water flowing downhill, of clouds forming and dissolving, of nutrients cycling through living organisms, and of landscapes slowly reshaped by erosion and deposition. Static representations fail because the Amazon is not static. To stand within the Amazon basin is to be inside something much larger than the visible forest. The air carries moisture recycled countless times. The rivers reflect rainfall that may have fallen hundreds of kilometers away. The ground beneath your feet is part of a landscape shaped by ancient geological processes that continue quietly today. The Amazon is not simply where trees grow densely near the equator. It is a vast, interconnected region whose true shape only becomes apparent when geography, water, and time are considered together. That understanding forms the foundation for everything else that follows, because the forest, the river, the climate, and the life within them are inseparable from the basin that holds them all. To understand why the Amazon exists at all, why water gathers here instead of elsewhere, and why forests rather than deserts dominate this region, you have to step far outside human time and into a version of Earth that no longer resembles the planet we know. Long before rivers carved their paths and long before trees reached for the sky, this part of South America was shaped by forces moving so slowly that their power is easy to underestimate. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the land that would one day cradle the Amazon was not part of South America at all. It was embedded within ancient supercontinents, drifting gradually across the planet's surface as tectonic plates shifted beneath it. These plates did not move with intention or direction in any way humans would recognize. They responded only to heat, pressure, and gravity deep within the Earth, sliding apart and colliding over spans of time so long that oceans opened and closed without leaving a trace recognizable to the naked eye. During this deep past, much of northern South America lay beneath shallow seas. Marine sediments accumulated slowly, layer by layer, forming the foundation of what would later become the Amazon basin. These sediments matter because they created the flat, low-lying surface that still defines the region today. Unlike landscapes shaped by violent uplift or repeated glaciation, the Amazon basin remained relatively gentle in its contours, a broad depression rather than a dramatic basin carved by erosion. This subtlety is part of why the region appears deceptively simple on maps, even though its history is anything but. As continents rearranged themselves, South America eventually separated from Africa, opening the Atlantic Ocean between them. At first, the young continent tilted slightly toward the west, and water drained in that direction. Early versions of the Amazon River, if they could be called that at all, flowed toward what is now the Pacific Ocean. This westward flow persisted for tens of millions of years, shaping drainage patterns that would later be completely overturned. The transformation began when another slow but monumental process took hold: the rise of the Andes Mountains. The Andes did not appear suddenly. They grew centimeter by centimeter as the Nazca Plate pushed beneath the South American plate along the continent's western edge. This process, known as subduction, compressed and thickened the crust, forcing rock upward and creating one of the longest mountain ranges on Earth. As the Andes rose, they acted not only as a physical barrier, but as a climatic and hydrological one. Moist air from the Atlantic, carried westward by prevailing winds, rose when it encountered the growing mountains, cooled, and released vast amounts of rain. This rainfall fed rivers that had nowhere to go but east. Over time, the uplift of the Andes became high enough to block westward drainage entirely. What had once been a gentle slope toward the Pacific became an insurmountable wall. Water pooled against it, forming immense wetlands, lakes, and slow-moving river systems across the interior of the continent. For millions of years, much of the Amazon basin functioned less like a river valley and more like an inland sea, a mosaic of shallow freshwater environments teeming with aquatic life. Fossil evidence shows that giant crocodile relatives, massive turtles, and freshwater dolphins once thrived in these ancient waters. Some of these lineages still survive today, adapted to rivers rather than open lakes, carrying genetic echoes of that watery past. Eventually, gravity asserted itself in a new direction. As the Atlantic side of the continent continued to subside slightly, and erosion lowered eastern highlands, a subtle gradient formed, sloping toward the east. Water, patient and persistent, began to follow this new path. The Amazon River did something almost unheard of in geological terms. It reversed its flow. What had once drained, westward slowly reorganized into an eastward moving system, carving channels across the basin and connecting the interior of the continent to the Atlantic Ocean. This reversal did not happen all at once. It unfolded over millions of years, with rivers capturing one another, wetlands draining gradually, and sediment being redistributed across vast distances. The result was the modern Amazon River, a system so large that it now carries more fresh water to the ocean than the next several largest rivers combined. This geological reorganization created the conditions necessary for the rainforest to emerge. The flatness of the basin allowed rivers to spread during the rainy season, depositing nutrient-rich sediments across floodplains. These sediments replenish soils that would otherwise have been exhausted by constant rainfall. The proximity of the Andes ensured a steady supply of minerals, eroded from mountain rock and transported downstream. At the same time, the equatorial location of the basin guaranteed consistent warmth, while the vast water network stabilized temperatures and humidity. Rainfall became not just abundant but reliable, cycling continuously between forest, atmosphere, and river. The forest did not appear overnight. It expanded gradually as plants adapted to increasingly wet conditions. Early forests likely resembled seasonal woodlands rather than the dense evergreen canopy seen today. Over time, species that thrived in constant moisture outcompeted those adapted to drier conditions. Trees grew taller, canopies closed, and the vertical structure of the forest became more complex. This complexity created new ecological niches, allowing insects, birds, mammals, and microorganisms to diversify alongside the plants they depended on. Importantly, the geology of the basin limited how nutrients behaved in the soil. Heavy rainfall leached minerals downward, leaving surface soils relatively poor. Instead of relying on deep, fertile ground, the forest evolved to recycle nutrients rapidly. Leaves fell, decomposed quickly, and were absorbed again almost immediately by roots near the surface. Fungi formed vast underground networks connecting trees, transferring nutrients and water in ways that science is still uncovering. This system only works because the basin's geology keeps water moving slowly enough for recycling to occur, but consistently enough to prevent drought. The Amazon, in this sense, is not a product of richness but of balance. The same forces that created its apparent abundance also impose limits, making the ecosystem remarkably efficient rather than extravagantly fertile. Even today, the shape of the land reflects its geological origins. The basin remains tilted ever so slightly toward the Atlantic, guiding water eastward. Rivers meander widely, carving new paths as sediment accumulates and shifts. Floodplains expand and contract with the seasons, echoing the ancient wetlands that once covered much of the region. The Andes continue to rise, imperceptibly but relentlessly, feeding the system with fresh sediment and maintaining the rainfall patterns that sustain the forest. The Amazon is therefore not a finished landscape. It is a process still unfolding, shaped by tectonic forces that operate far below the surface and far beyond human lifespans. Every tree that grows here, every river that bends, is part of a story written in stone long before life took root on land. The rainforest did not create the basin created the rainforest, setting the stage with flat land, flowing water, and a climate locked into stability by the slow choreography of continents and mountains. This deep history explains why the Amazon feels so internally coherent despite its vast size. It is not a collection of separate forests stitched together by chance. It is the expression of a single geological system, patiently assembled over hundreds of millions of years, continuing quietly beneath the living world above it. As the land settled into its broad, gentle basin, and water finally found its way eastward, the Amazon River system began to take on the form that now defines the region more than anything else. What we call the Amazon River is not a single river in the way most people imagine it, but the central artery of an immense circulatory system, one that stretches outward through tens of thousands of tributaries, streams, and seasonal channels. Some of these tributaries are small enough to cross in a few steps during the dry season, while others are so wide that their opposite banks disappear into haze. Together, they drain an area so large that rainfall falling in distant corners of the continent may take weeks or months to reach the main river, travelling through forests, floodplains, and underground seepage along the way. The structure of this system reflects the flatness of the basin itself. Because the land slopes only slightly toward the Atlantic, the river moves slowly, spreading outward, rather than cutting deeply into the ground. This slow movement allows it to gather water from an enormous area, but it also makes the river highly responsive to seasonal changes. When rain increases upstream, the effects are felt far downstream, not as sudden floods, but as gradual rises that transform the landscape in predictable rhythms. Each year, the Amazon River rises and falls by several meters, and this change does not simply affect the channel itself. It extends outward into the forest, flooding vast areas for months at a time. These seasonal floods are not destructive interruptions. They are the organizing principle of the ecosystem. During the wet season, rivers overflow their banks and spill into surrounding forests, creating temporary aquatic worlds where fish swim among tree trunks and nutrients spread evenly across the land. When the water retreats, it leaves behind enriched soils and isolated pools, resetting the stage for another cycle. This pulse connects regions that would otherwise remain separate. Fish migrate into flooded forests to feed on fruits and seeds, effectively acting as seed dispersers for trees. Birds and mammals follow the changing shoreline, adapting their movements to the slow breathing of the river. The Amazon's water cycle does not move only on the surface. Rainfall absorbed by the forest canopy evaporates back into the atmosphere, forming clouds that drift and release moisture elsewhere in the basin. This recycling means that a significant portion of the rain falling in the Amazon has already fallen there before, sometimes multiple times. The river and the forest together create a self-sustaining system where water is continuously reused rather than simply drained away. Within this system, not all rivers behave the same way. The Amazon basin contains 3 major types of rivers, each shaped by the land it flows through and the materials it carries. Whitewater rivers originate primarily in the Andes, where erosion grinds rock into fine sediment. These rivers appear muddy or brown, heavy with minerals and nutrients. They are the most fertile, supporting rich floodplains and dense vegetation along their banks. Blackwater rivers, by contrast, flow through ancient sandy soils low in minerals. Their dark colour comes not from mud, but from dissolved organic matter, tannins released by decaying leaves. These waters are acidic and nutrient-poor, yet they support specialized ecosystems uniquely adapted to such conditions. Clearwater rivers fall somewhere in between, flowing over rocky substrates that limit sediment, while avoiding the extreme acidity of blackwater systems. The boundaries between these rivers are often visible where they meet, flowing side by side for kilometers without immediately mixing, their colors forming slow, shifting patterns on the surface. These differences matter because they shape life in subtle but powerful ways. Fish species adapted to one type of river may struggle to survive in another. Forests growing along whitewater rivers differ from those along blackwater systems, not in obvious height or density, but in species composition and growth rates. Even insects and microorganisms reflect these distinctions, forming localized food webs tied directly to water chemistry. Yet despite these differences, the rivers remain connected, and organisms move between them over time, maintaining genetic exchange across the basin. This connectivity allows distant ecosystems to influence one another. Nutrients eroded from the Andes may nourish floodplains thousands of kilometers away. Seeds carried downstream may establish forests far from their point of origin. Even marine ecosystems feel the impact of this freshwater network. As the Amazon discharges such a vast volume of water into the Atlantic that it creates a plume extending hundreds of kilometers offshore, altering salinity and supporting unique marine communities. The river does not end at the coastline in any simple sense. Its influence fades gradually into the ocean, blurring the boundary between freshwater and saltwater worlds. For people living along its banks, the river is not a background feature, but the primary structure around which life is organized. Settlements rise and fall with the water. Travel routes change seasonally. Knowledge of currents, flood timing, and river behavior is passed down through generations, often with a precision that rivals scientific measurement. The river's predictability allows for planning, but its scale ensures humility. No single community controls it, and no intervention can redirect it without consequences felt far beyond the point of action. Even attempts to map the river struggle to keep pace with its movement. Channels shift, islands form and disappear, and sediment rearranges itself year by year. The Amazon River system is therefore best understood not as a fixed object, but as a process, a slow conversation between land and water. It carries the memory of ancient mountains, the imprint of seasonal rain, and the living presence of forests that depend on its cycles. Its tributaries knit together distant regions, ensuring that what happens in one corner of the basin eventually touches another. In this way, the river system does more than drain the Amazon. It holds it together, turning a vast and varied landscape into a single, functioning whole whose rhythm is measured not in days or weeks, but in the steady rise and fall of water that never truly stops moving. With the river system setting the rhythm of movement across the basin, the climate becomes the quiet force that keeps everything else in balance. Rarely dramatic, rarely extreme, but relentlessly consistent. Unlike temperate regions where the year is carved into distinct seasons of heat and cold, the Amazon exists in a narrow thermal range that barely wavers. Day after day, month after month, temperatures hover within a few degrees of one another, typically warm but not scorching, moderated by cloud cover, dense vegetation, and constant moisture. This stability is not accidental. The basin's position near the equator means sunlight arrives at nearly the same angle year-round, eliminating the dramatic seasonal shifts experienced farther from the tropics. But geography alone does not explain the Amazon's remarkably even climate. The forest itself plays an active role, regulating temperature through shade, transpiration, and the sheer physical mass of vegetation that absorbs and releases heat slowly. During the day, towering canopies intercept sunlight before it reaches the ground, preventing extreme surface heating. At night, that same vegetation releases stored warmth gradually, keeping temperatures from dropping sharply. As a result, daily temperature changes are often more noticeable than seasonal ones, with mornings, afternoons, and nights forming the primary rhythm, rather than months or quarters of the year. Rainfall, however, introduces variation without introducing chaos. Across the Amazon basin, rain does not fall evenly or continuously in every location. Instead, patterns shift gradually from place to place, influenced by distance from the Andes, proximity to the Atlantic, and the subtle circulation of air masses over the continent. Some regions receive rain almost daily, brief but intense showers that pass quickly and leave the forest steaming in their wake. Other areas experience more defined wet and less wet periods, though even the so-called dry season rarely means true dryness. It often means fewer storms, lower river levels, and longer stretches between rain events rather than an absence of moisture. What unites these variations is volume. Over the course of a year, much of the basin receives several meters of rainfall, enough to sustain dense vegetation and feed the river system continuously. This rain does not arrive randomly. It is part of a looping system in which the forest itself helps generate the conditions for its own precipitation. As sunlight warms leaves, trees release water vapor through tiny openings, a process known as transpiration. Individually, each tree contributes little, but across billions of trees the effect is immense. Moisture accumulates in the air above the canopy, forming clouds that eventually release rain, often only a short distance away. This recycling means that a significant portion of Amazonian rainfall originates not from the ocean but from the forest itself. The basin effectively breathes water into the atmosphere and draws it back down again, reinforcing its own climate. Humidity is therefore not just a byproduct of rain, but a constant presence. The air rarely dries out completely, even during periods of lower rainfall. This persistent humidity softens temperature extremes and slows evaporation from soil and leaf surfaces, allowing moisture to linger within the ecosystem. For plants and animals, this consistency reduces stress. Leaves do forwarding adaptation to sudden droughts, and organisms rarely face the shock of abrupt cold. Instead, life unfolds in an environment where change is gradual and predictable, favoring endurance over rapid response. The concept of seasons in the Amazon reflects this difference. Rather than being defined by temperature, seasons are defined by water. High water and low water periods shape movement, reproduction, and growth far more than changes in heat. Rivers swell during months of heavier rainfall, flooding forests and opening new pathways. Fish spawn and migrate in response to rising water, while terrestrial animals adjust their ranges as dry ground becomes temporarily scarce. When waters retreat, forests re-emerge, seeds germinate in newly exposed soil, and animals redistribute themselves once again. These cycles repeat with remarkable regularity, not because weather is perfectly uniform, but because the system as a whole is buffered against extremes. Even storms behave differently here. Thunderstorms build quickly in the afternoon heat, fueled by moisture rising from the forest, then release their energy in short, intense bursts. Lightning flashes, rain pours, and within an hour the sky often clears, leaving behind cooler air and refreshed vegetation. Prolonged storms are less common than in temperate regions, and destructive winds are relatively rare beneath the protective blanket of the canopy. This does not mean the Amazon is immune to variability. Larger climatic forces such as shifts in ocean temperatures can influence rainfall patterns across the basin. During certain years, parts of the Amazon experience unusually dry conditions, while others receive heavier rains than usual. These fluctuations test the resilience of the system, but the underlying structure remains intact because it evolved under conditions where water availability, though abundant, was never perfectly uniform. The forest and river together absorb these variations, redistributing moisture across space and time. Daily weather within the Amazon often follows a gentle rhythm that becomes familiar to those who live there. Mornings are typically warm and relatively calm, with mist rising from rivers and forest floors as the air warms. By midday, clouds begin to build as heat and moisture accumulate. Afternoon brings rain more often than not, sometimes localized, sometimes widespread, but rarely surprising. Evenings settle into quieter conditions, with insects emerging and temperatures easing slightly. This predictability allows life to synchronize itself to the environment without the need for constant adjustment. Plants open and close flowers, animals time their movements, and microorganisms carry out their cycles within a framework that changes slowly enough to accommodate them. What makes this climate remarkable is not its intensity, but its steadiness. The Amazon does not overwhelm life with extremes, it supports it with continuity. Heat is present but moderated, rain is abundant but recycled, and humidity binds everything together in a shared atmospheric envelope. The forest, the rivers, and the air form a single system in which weather is not an external force acting upon the land, but an internal process shaped by the land itself. This self-sustaining climate is fragile not because it is weak, but because it depends on scale. The vastness of the forest ensures that moisture recycling remains effective, that temperature moderation persists, and that rainfall patterns continue to loop inward rather than dissipating. It is this scale, built gradually through geological time and biological cooperation, that allows the Amazon to maintain its calm, steady presence day after day, season after season, without ever needing the sharp contrast that define climates elsewhere. The steady climate and predictable movement of water make it possible for the rainforest to grow not just outward, but upward, turning the Amazon into a vertical world where life is arranged in layers rather than spread evenly across the ground. From a distance, the forest looks like a flat green surface, but stepping inside reveals a space structured more like a living building than a field of trees. The ground is only the foundation. Above it rises a complex stacked environment where light, moisture, and movement change dramatically with height. At the highest points, individual trees push above the general canopy into full sunlight, forming what is known as the emergent layer. These giants are scattered rather than continuous, their crowns exposed to wind, intense light, and sudden storms. Life here is specialized and sparse. Leaves tend to be smaller and tougher to withstand constant exposure, and branches are often spaced wide apart. Birds that inhabit this level are strong, flyers, comfortable navigating open air rather than dense foliage. Insects here experience extreme conditions by rainforest standards, with intense heat during the day and rapid cooling after storms. Below this, the canopy forms the true roof of the forest, a nearly unbroken layer of interlocking branches and leaves that captures the majority of sunlight before it can reach lower levels. This is where the Amazon feels most alive. The canopy holds the greatest concentration of leaves, flowers, fruits, and animals, creating a continuous habitat that stretches for thousands of kilometers. Light here is abundant but filtered, broken into shifting patterns by moving leaves and passing clouds. The result is an environment that supports constant growth without exposing organisms to the harsh extremes felt above. Most photosynthesis happens in this layer, and as a result, most food originates here as well. Fruit trees time their production carefully, often coordinating with animal migrations and seasonal water cycles. Many animals rarely, if ever, descend to the ground. Monkeys travel laterally through branches, birds nest and feed without touching soil, and countless insects complete their entire life cycles among leaves and bark. Vines and epiphytes take advantage of this structure, climbing or anchoring themselves high above the forest floor without ever rooting in the ground. Orchids, bromeliads, and mosses collect rainwater and debris, creating miniature ecosystems suspended in the air, complete with insects, frogs, and microorganisms living entirely off captured moisture and nutrients. Beneath the canopy lies the understory, a dimmer, quieter space where light arrives only in fragments. Here, plants grow slowly, investing energy in large, thin leaves designed to capture every available ray. Growth is careful rather than rapid. Flowers tend to be vivid in colour or strong in scent, compensating for lower visibility by attracting specific pollinators that navigate this shaded environment with precision. Animals in the understory are often adapted to low light, relying on sound, smell, and memory more than vision. Movement is cautious, and camouflage becomes essential. The understory acts as a buffer between the bustling canopy above and the forest floor below, absorbing fallen leaves, branches, and rainwater as they descend. The forest floor itself receives surprisingly little light, often less than a few % of what strikes the canopy. It is cooler, darker, and more stable than the layers above. Contrary to popular imagination, it is not where most life thrives, but where life is recycled. Fallen leaves, dead insects, and animal waste accumulate briefly before being broken down by fungi, bacteria, and invertebrates. Decomposition happens quickly, returning nutrients to the system before they can be washed away by rain. Because nutrients are rapidly reused, soil itself remains relatively poor, lacking the deep fertility found in temperate forests. This is why most plants do not invest heavily in deep roots. Instead, root systems spread wide and shallow, often intertwining with fungal networks that extend their reach. Life here depends not on storing resources underground, but on capturing and reusing them efficiently at the surface. The vertical structure of the forest explains why so much Amazonian life exists above ground. Light is the limiting factor, and light diminishes rapidly with height. By occupying branches, trunks, and leaves, organisms position themselves closer to energy sources while avoiding competition on the crowded forest floor. This leads to vertical movement becoming as important as horizontal movement. Many animals shift between layers depending on time of day, season, or life stage. Frogs descend to lay eggs in water collected in bromeliads, then retreat upward. Insects emerge on the forest floor, climb toward light, and are eaten before ever reaching the canopy. Some mammals forage high above, ground during the day and sleep lower down at night, adjusting to temperature and predator pressure. Plants also participate in this vertical dance. Seedlings wait patiently in low light for years, sometimes decades, until a falling tree opens a gap in the canopy. When that happens, light floods in, triggering rapid growth as suppressed plants race upward to claim space. These gaps are not accidents, but essential features of the system, preventing any single layer from becoming static. Over time, this constant upward and downward movement creates a forest that is dynamic without being chaotic, structured without being rigid. The rainforest's architecture reflects everything discussed before it. The stable climate allows continuous growth. The water cycle supports constant moisture, and the geology provides the flat foundation that lets trees grow tall without frequent disturbance from landslides or frost. Each layer is shaped by the one above and below it, connected by falling rain, drifting spores, and moving animals. The forest does not function as separate levels stacked independently. It functions as a vertical continuum where energy, matter, and life move slowly but continuously up and down, day after day, year after year, reinforcing a structure that appears timeless only because it is constantly renewing itself. Once the structure of the forest is understood from the ground to the canopy, attention naturally settles on what lies just beneath the surface, because it is here that one of the Amazon's most misunderstood realities exists. For a place known globally for its apparent abundance, the soil itself is surprisingly poor. unlike temperate forests where thick, dark soil stores nutrients over long periods of time, much of the Amazon rests on soils that have been heavily weathered over millions of years. Constant rainfall has washed soluble minerals downward and away, leaving behind substrates dominated by clay and sand, low in essential nutrients like phosphorus, calcium, and nitrogen. To someone unfamiliar with tropical systems, this seems contradictory. How can such towering trees and dense vegetation grow from soil that appears so depleted? The answer lies not in what the soil contains, but in how quickly nutrients move through the system. In the Amazon, fertility is not stored, it circulates. Leaves, branches, fruit, and animal waste fall continuously to the forest floor, forming a thin layer of organic material that exists only briefly before it is broken down. Warm temperatures and high humidity create ideal conditions for decomposers. Fungi spread rapidly through fallen material, bacteria multiply, and insects shred organic matter into fragments small enough to be consumed and recycled. What might take years to decompose in cooler climates can disappear in weeks or even days here. This rapid breakdown releases nutrients almost immediately, but they do not linger. Roots and fungal networks absorb them as quickly as they are made available, pulling them back into living tissue before rain can wash them deeper into the soil where they would be lost. In this way, nutrients spend most of their time inside plants, animals, and microorganisms rather than in the ground itself. The forest floor functions less as a reservoir and more as a transfer point, a place where energy and matter briefly pause before moving on. This creates a system that is efficient but delicate. Any interruption to the cycle, such as the removal of vegetation, exposes the soil to rain without the protective layer of roots and leaf litter. Nutrients are then leached away rapidly, leaving behind ground that is difficult to restore. The forest's reliance on living storage explains why so many species invest heavily in surface-level roots and partnerships with fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi extend far beyond individual root systems, connecting multiple plants and increasing the area through which nutrients can be absorbed. In exchange for sugars produced by photosynthesis, fungi deliver minerals and water with remarkable efficiency. These relationships are ancient, evolving alongside plants as they adapted to life in nutrient-poor environments. In the Amazon, they form a hidden infrastructure beneath every step, unseen but essential. Decomposition also shapes the forest's pace. Because organic matter does not accumulate deeply, the forest avoids the buildup of thick, fuel-rich layers that could support widespread fires. Moist conditions further suppress combustion, making fire a rare and localized event under natural conditions. This stability allows long-lived trees to dominate, investing energy in slow growth rather than rapid reproduction. It also encourages specialization. Species adapt to very specific nutrient pathways, timing leaf drop, fruiting, and growth to align with microbial activity and rainfall patterns. Even animals participate directly in nutrient cycling. Herbivores concentrate nutrients by feeding in one area and defecating in another. Predators redistribute those nutrients again by moving prey through the landscape. Insects carry fragments of organic matter into nests, altering decomposition rates and soil chemistry at small scales. Over time, these countless small movements create subtle gradients of fertility across the forest, influencing where certain plants thrive and where others struggle. The Amazon's nutrient cycle therefore operates not as a single loop, but as a dense web of interactions layered atop the physical structure of the forest. What looks like uniform ground is, at a microscopic level, highly varied, shaped by root density, moisture, fungal presence, and the history of fallen trees and animal activity. This variability supports biodiversity by preventing any one species from dominating too completely. It also reinforces the need for continuity. Because nutrients move quickly and are rarely stored, the system depends on constant input from living organisms. Leaves must fall, microbes must work, roots must absorb. When this continuity is broken, recovery is slow because the soil alone cannot provide what the living network once supplied. This reality challenges older assumptions about tropical forests as endlessly resilient. The Amazon is resilient in motion but vulnerable when stalled. Its strength lies in flow, not in accumulation. The forest persists not because it sits atop rich earth, but because it has perfected the art of reuse, keeping energy circulating within its living fabric. Every towering tree, every epiphyte clinging to a branch, and every animal moving through the layers above is supported by this unseen economy, one that turns scarcity into stability through speed, cooperation, and time. With nutrients moving quickly through living tissue rather than lingering in the soil, trees become the primary long-term structures of the Amazon, holding matter, shaping space, and defining how life unfolds over decades and centuries. What is immediately striking about the forest is not the dominance of a single species, but the opposite. Tree diversity in the Amazon is extraordinarily high, with hundreds of species potentially occurring within a single square kilometre. Many of these species exist in low densities, sometimes represented by only a handful of individuals across wide areas. This pattern reduces competition for the same resources and limits the spread of pests and disease, which would otherwise find it easy to move between closely packed, genetically similar trees. Each species occupies a slightly different ecological niche, varying in growth rate, wood density, leaf structure, and timing of reproduction. Some specialize in fast growth following canopy gaps, while others invest in slow, steady expansion under shaded conditions. This specialization allows trees to coexist without direct confrontation, sharing space by separating themselves in time, height, or physiological strategy. Growth in the Amazon is rarely hurried. Although warmth and moisture are abundant, nutrient limitations encourage trees to build slowly, producing dense wood that resists decay and provides structural stability. Many of the largest trees are hundreds of years old, having survived countless seasonal floods, storms, and periods of competition. Their longevity shapes the forest by maintaining canopy structure over long periods, allowing other organisms to adapt to stable conditions. Slow growth also means that when trees do fall, they leave behind large gaps that reshape local environments for years, influencing which species can establish themselves next. Supporting these towering forms are buttress roots, a feature common in large tropical trees. These wide, flaring structures extend outward from the base of the trunk rather than downward into deep soil. They provide stability in shallow, nutrient-poor ground, anchoring trees against wind and the shifting weight of saturated soils during the rainy season. Buttress roots also increase surface area for nutrient absorption, intercepting organic material before it is washed away. Over time, they become habitats in their own right, sheltering insects, amphibians, and small mammals within their folds. The presence of buttress roots is a visible reminder that the forest's strength lies in surface-level interactions rather than deep anchoring. Competition among trees in the Amazon centers on light rather than nutrients. Because nutrients are recycled rapidly and shared through fungal networks, access to sunlight becomes the primary limiting factor. Trees invest heavily in vertical growth, stretching trunks upward with minimal branching until they reach the canopy. Once there, they spread their crowns, laterally competing with neighbours for space in the sunlit layer. Leaves are arranged to maximize light capture while minimizing shading of their own lower branches. Some species tolerate shade for decades, waiting patiently beneath the canopy until an opening appears. Others require direct sunlight from early stages and germinate only in gaps created by fallen trees. This division of strategies reduces direct competition and allows multiple growth forms to coexist. Tree reproduction reflects this diversity of approaches. Some species produce large seeds rich in nutrients, giving seedlings a better chance of surviving in low-light conditions. Others produce vast numbers of small seeds, relying on chance and quantity to find favourable conditions. Dispersal mechanisms vary widely, involving wind, water, birds, mammals, and even fish during seasonal floods. These dispersal routes link tree life cycles to the movements of animals and the rhythms of the river, reinforcing the interconnected nature of the ecosystem. Once established, trees influence conditions around them in subtle ways. Their canopies shape microclimates by altering light, temperature, and humidity. Leaf litter composition affects decomposition rates and soil chemistry. Root systems influence water infiltration and stability. Over time, these effects create feedback loops that favour certain assemblages of species, contributing to the patchwork nature of the forest. No two sections of the Amazon are identical, even if they appear similar at a distance. The forest is a mosaic built from countless individual histories, each tree carrying the imprint of its growth conditions, neighbours, and past disturbances. Despite their apparent permanence, trees are not static. They respond continuously to their environment, adjusting growth patterns, shedding branches, and altering leaf production in response to light availability and stress. Some species exhibit remarkable resilience, surviving damage and continuing to grow around wounds. Others are more sensitive, declining slowly after subtle changes in conditions. This variability ensures that the forest remains dynamic, capable of adapting to gradual shifts without losing its overall structure. Trees also serve as the primary link between the physical environment and the living community. They convert sunlight into chemical energy, store carbon, and regulate water flow through transpiration. In doing so, they support not only the organisms that live among their branches, but also the broader climate system discussed earlier. The forest's ability to moderate temperature and recycle rainfall depends directly on the collective behaviour of its trees. Each trunk and leaf contributes incrementally to processes that operate at continental scales. Understanding the trees of the Amazon therefore means understanding the forest itself, not as a collection of individual organisms, but as a coordinated system shaped by slow growth, patient competition, and long-term stability. Their presence ties together the geology beneath, the water moving through the basin, and the life layered above, forming the living framework upon which everything else depends. Once the trees establish the framework of the forest, an even greater diversity of plant life begins to occupy the spaces they create, filling every available surface with forms that rarely draw attention on maps or from a distance, but define the daily reality of the Amazon. Beyond trunks and crowns exists an intricate world of plants that do not rely on deep roots or open ground. Epiphytes cling to branches high above the forest floor, vines twist and climb toward light, and understory plants spread slowly beneath the canopy, each adapted to conditions that would be inhospitable in other ecosystems. Epiphytes, often mistaken for parasites, draw no nutrients from the trees they inhabit. Instead, they use bark and branches purely as physical support, anchoring themselves where light and air are more abundant. Orchids, bromeliads, mosses, and ferns dominate this suspended environment, collecting rainwater and organic debris in their leaves and root systems. Over time, these collections form miniature ecosystems supporting insects, spiders, frogs, and microorganisms that never touch the ground. Some bromeliads hold enough water to sustain entire aquatic communities, complete with larvae and predators existing meters above the soil. These plants thrive because they are adapted to scarcity. Nutrients arrive sporadically in the form of dust, decomposing leaves, or animal droppings, and epiphytes have evolved structures that capture and retain these inputs with remarkable efficiency. Thickened leaves, overlapping rosettes, and specialized root hairs allow them to absorb moisture directly from the air, making them less dependent on consistent rainfall reaching their exact location. Below and between the trees, vines known as lianas take a different approach. Rather than investing energy in thick trunks, they rely on surrounding trees for support, channeling resources into rapid vertical growth. Lianas can reach the canopy quickly, weaving through branches and forming networks that connect multiple trees. This strategy allows them to compete for light without bearing the structural costs of standing alone. Their presence alters the forest's architecture, sometimes increasing connectivity for animals moving through the canopy, while also adding weight and tension that can influence when and how trees fall. Some vines remain flexible, bending with movement, while others become woody and rigid, forming permanent pathways across the forest. Understory plants, living in the dim light beneath the canopy, face a different set of challenges. Sunlight arrives in brief, scattered patches, and competition is constant. Many understory species grow slowly, producing broad, thin leaves designed to maximize light capture. These leaves often orient themselves carefully, adjusting angles to avoid shading one another while taking advantage of fleeting sunbeams. Growth here is measured not in rapid upward expansion but in persistence. Some plants wait years, even decades, in a suppressed state, maintaining minimal metabolism until conditions change. When a tree falls and light floods the area, these waiting plants respond quickly, accelerating growth and reproduction before the canopy closes again. Adaptations to low-light environments extend beyond leaf shape. Some plants rely on strong scents or vivid colors to attract pollinators that navigate shaded spaces. Others flower rarely but produce large, conspicuous blooms when they do, ensuring successful reproduction despite limited opportunities. Insects play a crucial role in these interactions, acting as carriers of pollen across vertical and horizontal distances. Many plants time flowering to coincide with specific insect life cycles, aligning their reproductive windows with the presence of effective pollinators. These relationships are often highly specialized, with certain insects visiting only particular plant species, creating tight ecological bonds that reinforce diversity. Fungi add another layer to these connections. Beyond their role in decomposition, fungi form symbiotic relationships with many plants, extending root systems and increasing access to water and nutrients. In the understory, where soil nutrients are scarce and competition is intense, these fungal partnerships can determine whether a plant survives or fades. Some plants even rely almost entirely on fungal networks for nutrition, lacking chlorophyll and living in permanent shade. These mycoheterotrophic plants tap into the energy flowing through fungal connections, drawing indirectly on the photosynthesis of nearby trees. Such strategies illustrate how plant life in the Amazon often blurs traditional distinctions between independence and dependence. Climbing strategies vary widely among plant species. Some vines twine around supports, others use hooks, tendrils, or adhesive roots to ascend. Each method reflects a balance between stability and flexibility, allowing plants to respond to the movement of their hosts without detaching. As trees sway in wind or shift during storms, climbing plants adjust, redistributing tension along their stems. Over time, this creates a living lattice that strengthens the forest's vertical complexity. Resource sharing occurs not only through fungal networks, but also through the physical structure plants create together. Epiphytes trap organic matter that eventually falls to the forest floor, contributing to nutrient cycling. Vines provide corridors for animals that disperse seeds and spores. Understory plants stabilize soil and regulate moisture near the ground, reducing erosion during heavy rains. Each plant contributes to conditions that support others, even as competition persists. The result is a densely interwoven system where cooperation and rivalry coexist without clear boundaries. This plant diversity influences animal life at every level. Insects specialize on particular plant tissues, birds and mammals depend on specific fruiting cycles, and amphibians rely on water held by epiphytes for reproduction. Changes in plant composition ripple outward, affecting entire communities. Because many plant species are sensitive to subtle shifts in light, moisture, and nutrient availability, they serve as early indicators of broader environmental change. Their presence or absence reveals patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed in such a vast landscape. Together, epiphytes, vines, and understory plants transform the Amazon from a forest of trees into a three-dimensional living system, dense with interactions that unfold slowly and continuously. They fill gaps left by larger organisms, recycle resources with precision, and create habitats within habitats. Their quiet persistence supports the complexity that makes the Amazon resilient, ensuring that life thrives not just where conditions are ideal, but wherever there is space to adapt. As plant life fills the forest vertically and laterally, it does more than occupy space and capture light, because every leaf also participates in the movement of water between earth and sky. The Amazon does not receive rain passively. It helps produce it, sustain it, and distribute it across vast distances through processes so gradual and continuous that they often go unnoticed. At the center of this system is transpiration, the release of water vapor from plant leaves. Each tree draws water upward from the soil through its roots, transporting it through internal channels to its leaves, where it escapes into the air through microscopic openings. Individually, this loss is small, but across billions of leaves, transpiration becomes one of the dominant forces shaping the region's atmosphere. On warm days, moisture rises invisibly from the canopy, forming a steady upward flow that cools leaves and humidifies the air above them. This process is not limited to trees. Epiphytes, vines, understory plants, and even mosses contribute their share, releasing water absorbed during rainstorms or drawn from the humid air. The combined effect is an atmosphere saturated with moisture, primed for cloud formation. As warm, moist air rises, it expands and cools, allowing water vapor to condense into tiny droplets. Over the forest, this happens repeatedly, creating clouds that are often local in origin rather than imported from distant oceans. These clouds may drift short distances before releasing rain, sometimes returning moisture to the same stretch of forest that produced it only hours earlier. In this way, rainfall becomes a recycled resource, moving through a loop that binds forest and sky together. Studies have shown that a significant portion of Amazonian rain has already fallen within the basin before, sometimes multiple times, as water evaporates, condenses, and falls again. This recycling stabilizes rainfall patterns, reducing dependence on external weather systems and buffering the region against short-term variability. Cloud formation over forested areas differs subtly from that over open land. The canopy's rough surface disrupts airflow, encouraging upward movement and turbulence that aid condensation. Dark leaves absorb heat during the day, warming the air just enough to drive convection without producing extreme temperature gradients. At night, stored heat is released slowly, preventing rapid cooling that could destabilize atmospheric circulation. Together, these effects create a climate that favors frequent, moderate rainfall rather than infrequent, intense storms. The moisture generated by the forest does not remain confined to its immediate surroundings. Air currents carry humid air masses westward and southward across the continent, forming what some researchers describe as atmospheric rivers, invisible pathways that transport water vapor over long distances. As this moisture encounters cooler air or rises over elevated terrain, it condenses and falls as rain, supporting ecosystems far beyond the Amazon basin itself. Grasslands, agricultural regions, and even distant mountain slopes benefit indirectly from the forest's ability to move water through the atmosphere. In this sense, the Amazon functions as a continental-scale water pump, redistributing rainfall across South America. This influence becomes especially apparent during seasonal shifts. As solar heating patterns change slightly throughout the year, the balance between evaporation and condensation adjusts, altering where and when rain falls. Instead of dramatic temperature swings, the Amazon experiences shifts in water availability that ripple through the river system described earlier. Rivers rise as recycled rain feeds tributaries, floodplains expand, and aquatic habitats reappear. When rainfall decreases, water levels fall gradually, never collapsing suddenly, because stored moisture in soils, vegetation, and the atmosphere continues to circulate. This slow response reflects the forest's ability to retain and release water over time, smoothing out extremes that might otherwise disrupt life. The relationship between vegetation and rainfall creates feedback loops that reinforce the forest's stability. Healthy forests produce abundant transpiration, supporting regular rainfall, which in turn sustains vegetation growth. When vegetation is reduced, transpiration decreases, leading to drier air and reduced rainfall, which further stresses remaining plants. This sensitivity explains why the Amazon's climate is closely tied to its physical extent. The forest's size matters because moisture recycling depends on continuous coverage. Breaks in canopy reduce local humidity and can alter regional weather patterns if they become widespread. Despite this sensitivity, the system is remarkably robust when intact. Individual trees may fall, storms may open gaps, and rivers may shift channels, but the overall process of water recycling continues as long as the forest remains connected at large scales. Each plant, from the tallest emergent tree to the smallest epiphyte, contributes incrementally, ensuring that no single component carries the entire burden. The result is a climate defined not by dramatic events, but by persistence. Rain falls often, but rarely with destructive force. Humidity remains high, but rarely oppressive to organisms adapted to it. Clouds build and dissolve daily, marking time without signaling crisis. For life within the Amazon, this constancy is as important as abundance. It allows plants to grow slowly, animals to synchronize reproduction with water cycles, and microorganisms to operate continuously without interruption. The forest's influence on rainfall therefore extends beyond meteorology. It shapes biological rhythms, determines which species can survive, and influences how energy moves through the ecosystem. By producing and recycling rain, the Amazon sustains not only itself but the broader landscapes connected to it through air and water. This quiet exchange between leaves and clouds forms one of the most powerful yet understated processes on Earth, a reminder that the forest's greatest strength lies not in spectacle, but in steady collective action carried out over immense scales of space and time. As the forest shapes the movement of water and air, it also shapes how animals live within it. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the lives of mammals, many of which remain present but rarely visible. The Amazon supports an extraordinary diversity of mammal species, from some of the largest predators in the Americas to small, highly specialized creatures that spend their entire lives in the canopy or beneath leaf litter. Yet even where mammals are abundant, encounters are uncommon. Dense vegetation limits sightlines, sound is absorbed by foliage, and most animals have evolved to avoid unnecessary movement. In this environment, survival depends less on speed or strength than on discretion. Jaguars, often imagined as ever-present hunters moving confidently through the forest, spend much of their time resting, conserving energy, and moving only when conditions are favourable. Their territories are large, and their movements are deliberate, following riverbanks, game trails, and edges where prey activity is more predictable. Rather than patrolling continuously, a jaguar may revisit the same paths over months or years, learning the rhythms of its territory and responding to changes gradually rather than impulsively. This patience reduces encounters, not just with humans, but with other predators as well. Tapirs, among the largest herbivores in the Amazon, exemplify a different strategy. They move slowly through the understory, feeding on leaves, fruits, and aquatic plants, often following the same routes repeatedly. Their bulk allows them to push through dense vegetation without haste, and their thick skin provides some protection against insects and minor injuries. Tapirs are most active during twilight and nighttime hours, further reducing the chance of observation. Despite their size, they blend into the forest through stillness rather than camouflage, standing motionless for long periods when disturbed. Sloths represent an extreme adaptation to the forest's slow pace. Their metabolism is deliberately low, their movements measured in centimeters per minute rather than meters. By feeding on leaves that offer limited energy, sloths minimize their needs, spending most of their lives suspended in the canopy, where predators are fewer and movement is less conspicuous. Their fur hosts algae and microorganisms that tint it green, further blending them into their surroundings. This apparent vulnerability is, in fact, a strategy that works precisely because the forest rewards patience and reduces the value of constant motion. Monkeys introduce a contrasting dynamic, combining social behavior with vertical mobility. Different species occupy different layers of the forest, from howler monkeys whose deep calls carry across kilometers to small tamarins that move quickly through tangled branches. Social structures vary widely. Some species live in large, stable groups with complex communication, while others form smaller, more fluid associations. Group living offers advantages in detecting predators and locating food, but it also requires coordination in a landscape where visibility is limited. Vocalizations become essential, allowing individuals to maintain contact without direct sight. These sounds, often heard but rarely traced to their source, contribute to the forest's layered soundscape described earlier. Not all mammals rely on trees. Along rivers and flooded forests, river dolphins navigate waters that change constantly with the seasons. Unlike their marine relatives, these dolphins have flexible necks and reduced dorsal fins, adaptations that allow them to maneuver among submerged branches and trunks. During the high water season, they move into flooded forests, hunting fish among the trees, When waters recede, they return to river channels, adjusting their range without migrating long distances. Their presence underscores how mammal life in the Amazon is often tied directly to water cycles rather than fixed territories. Social behavior among mammals reflects the balance between cooperation and avoidance. In an environment where food resources are spread out and unpredictable, solitary lifestyles are common. Predators and large herbivores often operate alone or in small family units, reducing competition and making efficient use of space. Social species tend to rely on resources that are more evenly distributed, such as fruiting trees that can support multiple individuals at once. Even then, group sizes are constrained by the need to move quietly and avoid drawing attention. Movement patterns across the forest are shaped by the need to minimize energy expenditure. Animals follow established routes where vegetation is less dense, often along ridges, fallen logs, or riverbanks. These paths become part of the forest's invisible infrastructure, used repeatedly by different species over time. Because the forest floor changes slowly, these routes remain reliable, allowing animals to navigate large territories without constant exploration. Vertical movement adds another dimension. Some mammals shift between ground and canopy depending on food availability, temperature, and predator presence. Others remain almost entirely within a single layer, reducing encounters with competitors. The rarity of sightings is not due to low numbers, but to this combination of dense habitat, cautious behavior, and layered space. Large mammals in particular avoid open areas during daylight hours, resting in cover and moving primarily during dawn, dusk, or night. When humans do encounter them, it is often by chance, at the intersection of animal routes and human movement, rather than because animals are seeking visibility. This pattern reinforces a key truth about the Amazon. It is full without being busy, populated without being obvious. Mammals here are not performers in a visible landscape, but participants in a system that values efficiency, restraint, and adaptation to slow change. Their lives unfold largely unseen, synchronized with the rhythms of water, light, and vegetation established long before human presence. By understanding how mammals move, rest, and interact within this environment, it becomes clear that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The forest is alive with activity that simply does not announce itself, continuing quietly beneath the canopy, integrated seamlessly into the processes that sustain the Amazon as a whole. Above the forest floor and often beyond direct sight, birds occupy a layer of the Amazon that is defined less by visibility than by sound, because in a forest where dense foliage limits vision, communication travels most effectively through the air. Long before a bird is seen, it is usually heard, its presence announced by calls that carry through branches, across rivers, and between distant trees. The Amazon holds more bird species than any other region on Earth, and this abundance is not expressed through constant movement, but through an intricate soundscape that changes subtly with time of day, season, and weather. Parrots and macaws are among the most recognizable contributors to this acoustic environment, their calls loud and far-reaching, serving both to maintain contact within flocks and to define occupied areas. These birds often travel in groups, moving between feeding and roosting sites that may be kilometers apart, following routes shaped by fruit availability rather than fixed territory boundaries. Their strong beaks allow them to exploit hard seeds and unripe fruits that other animals cannot, reducing competition and anchoring them to specific tree species that fruit predictably over long periods. Toucans, with their oversized bills, occupy a different niche, feeding primarily on fruit and acting as important seed dispersers. Their movements are often quieter, more deliberate and less conspicuous, but their presence has lasting effects on forest composition as seeds pass through their digestive systems and are deposited far from parent trees. High above, harpy eagles represent another dimension of bird life, one defined by patience and precision rather than constant flight. These large raptors spend long periods perched silently, scanning the canopy below for signs of movement. Their hunting strategy depends on surprise and short bursts of power rather than pursuit, reflecting the limited visibility and tight spaces of the forest. Harpy eagles maintain large territories, but they do not patrol them actively. Instead, they rely on intimate knowledge of key areas where prey activity is more likely, returning to these locations repeatedly over time. Sound communication plays a central role in how birds organize their lives in such a complex environment. Many species rely on calls to establish presence, attract mates, and coordinate group movements without the need for visual contact. These calls are often tuned to specific frequencies that travel efficiently through dense vegetation, avoiding overlap with other species to reduce confusion. Dawn and dusk are particularly active periods, not because birds are more numerous then, but because atmospheric conditions allow sound to travel farther. Cooler air and reduced wind create a stable medium for communication, and birds take advantage of this by calling more frequently during these times. Life in the canopy demands constant adjustment. Branches sway, leaves shift, and fruit availability changes as trees cycle through flowering and fruiting phases. Birds adapt by maintaining flexible home ranges rather than fixed territories, tracking resources across vertical and horizontal space. Some species remain within relatively small areas year-round, while others move seasonally within the forest, responding to regional changes in food abundance rather than migrating long distances. These internal movements can be subtle, involving shifts of only a few kilometers, but they are enough to redistribute energy and seeds across the landscape. Nesting strategies reflect the same balance between stability and flexibility. Some birds build exposed nests high in trees, relying on height and camouflage for protection. Others nest in cavities, using old woodpecker holes or natural crevices, benefiting from the insulating properties of thick wood. Ground nesting is rare and risky, given the number of predators and the frequency of flooding, further reinforcing the importance of vertical space. Parental care varies widely, from species that invest heavily in a small number of offspring to those that produce multiple clutches with minimal care, trusting numbers rather than attention to ensure survival. Seasonal changes influence bird behavior even in the absence of temperature variation. During periods of high rainfall, fruiting patterns shift, insects become more abundant, and nesting opportunities increase. Birds time breeding to coincide with these conditions, ensuring that food is available when chicks hatch. In drier periods, activity may decrease slightly, with birds conserving energy and reducing movement. These adjustments are gradual, reflecting the forest's overall steadiness rather than abrupt change. Birds also serve as connectors within the ecosystem. By moving seeds, controlling insect populations, and providing prey for larger predators, they link plant life, invertebrates, and mammals into a continuous network. Their sensitivity to habitat changes makes them reliable indicators of forest health. When canopy structure is altered or food sources decline, bird communities respond quickly, shifting composition long before changes become visible in tree cover. In this way, birds reveal the forest condition through presence and absence, through altered calls, and through changes in movement patterns. Despite their abundance, birds remain part of the Amazon's broader theme of subtlety. They do not dominate the landscape through constant motion or spectacle. Instead, they contribute through rhythm, timing, and sound, weaving an auditory layer into the forest that complements the slower, quieter movements of mammals and plants. Their lives unfold in close alignment with the cycles of rain, fruiting, and light established earlier, reinforcing the sense that the Amazon functions not as a collection of separate worlds, but as a single, integrated system where even the most visible inhabitants remain carefully attuned to their surroundings. Where birds fill the air with sound and movement, reptiles and amphibians occupy a different rhythm of the Amazon, one governed almost entirely by moisture and heat rather than light or distance. Their lives unfold closer to surfaces, in water, on bark, beneath leaves, and along river banks, places where temperature remains stable and humidity rarely drops. Frogs are often the most noticeable representatives of this group, not because they are easily seen, but because their calls emerge at specific moments, usually after rain, when conditions are ideal for movement and reproduction. Many Amazonian frogs are small and fragile, their skin thin enough to absorb oxygen and water directly from the environment. This permeability allows them to survive without heavy lungs or thick scales, but it also makes them extremely sensitive to changes in moisture and air quality. As a result, frogs tend to remain close to water sources or damp microhabitats, emerging primarily at night when evaporation slows and predators are less active. Their calls serve multiple purposes at once, attracting mates, establishing spacing between individuals, and signaling readiness to breed, all coordinated within narrow environmental windows. Snakes represent a different adaptation, relying on stillness and efficient energy use rather than constant activity. In the Amazon, many snakes are ambush predators, positioning themselves along animal paths, near water, or within leaf litter, where prey movement is predictable. Their bodies are designed to conserve heat and minimize energy loss, allowing them to go long periods without feeding. Some species are arboreal, navigating branches with slow, deliberate movements, while others remain primarily terrestrial or aquatic. Venom, where present, is not a weapon of aggression, but a tool for rapid immobilization, reducing the risk of injury in a dense environment where escape routes are limited. Coloration among snakes often reflects their ecological role. Some species blend into leaf litter or bark, while others display bold patterns that signal toxicity or mimic more dangerous animals, reducing the likelihood of attack. Caimans, the Amazon's most visible reptiles, anchor the aquatic end of this spectrum. They spend much of their lives in or near water, regulating body temperature by shifting between sun and shade. During the day, they may rest motionless along riverbanks, absorbing heat, while at night they become more active, hunting fish and other aquatic animals. Their presence influences behavior throughout the ecosystem. Fish alter movement patterns, birds choose nesting sites carefully, and mammals approach water with caution. Despite their size, caimans are deeply integrated into the seasonal rhythms of the river, adjusting activity as water levels rise and fall. In flooded forests, they move among submerged trees, while during low water periods, they retreat to deeper channels. Lizards occupy yet another set of niches, ranging from fast-moving species that dart across trunks and forest floors to slow, cryptic forms that rely on camouflage and patience. Many are active during the day, basking briefly to raise body temperature before retreating into shade. Their diets vary widely, including insects, fruits, and small vertebrates, making them flexible participants in the forest food web. Like snakes, lizards depend on external heat sources to regulate metabolism, tying their activity closely to weather patterns. Even small changes in cloud cover or rainfall can influence when and where they move. Coloration and chemical defenses play an important role across this group. Many amphibians produce toxins through their skin, deterring predators and allowing them to remain active without heavy armor. Bright colors often accompany these defenses, serving as warnings rather than camouflage. In contrast, non-toxic species tend to rely on subtle coloration that matches their surroundings, disappearing into moss, bark, or leaf litter. These visual strategies reduce the need for flight, conserving energy in an environment where constant movement is costly. Amphibians, in particular, serve as sensitive indicators of environmental health. Because they absorb water and oxygen directly through their skin, they respond quickly to changes in humidity, temperature, and chemical composition of their surroundings. Declines in frog populations often signal broader ecological shifts, sometimes before other changes become visible. In the Amazon, their continued diversity reflects the stability of moisture cycles and the integrity of forest microhabitats. Where forest cover remains intact, amphibians persist across a wide range of elevations and conditions, each species finely tuned to a narrow ecological band. Reptiles and amphibians illustrate how life in the Amazon adapts not through constant motion or dominance, but through alignment with the environment's most consistent features. Warmth, moisture, and shelter shape their behavior more strongly than competition or territorial defense. Their movements are measured, their presence often revealed indirectly through sound, tracks, or brief glimpses rather than prolonged encounters. Together, they form a quiet but essential layer of the ecosystem, regulating insect populations, serving as prey for birds and mammals, and linking aquatic and terrestrial systems through their life cycles. Their reliance on environmental stability mirrors the broader pattern of the Amazon itself, where continuity and balance allow diverse forms of life to persist without drawing attention, woven seamlessly into the larger story unfolding around them. As rivers rise and spill into the forest, they reveal a dimension of the Amazon that is often overlooked because much of it exists out of sight, beneath the surface of dark or sediment-filled water. The Amazon holds the greatest diversity of freshwater fish on Earth, with thousands of species occupying rivers, streams, floodplains, and temporary wetlands. This diversity is not evenly distributed. It is shaped by water chemistry, flow speed, depth, and seasonal change, creating distinct aquatic neighborhoods that shift throughout the year. In fast-moving channels, streamlined fish hold position against the current, while in still backwaters, slower species navigate dense vegetation and submerged routes. Some fish remain small and inconspicuous, completing entire life cycles within narrow stretches of river, while others grow large and wide-ranging, moving across the basin as water levels change. Among the most striking of these is the arapaime, one of the largest freshwater fish in the world. It inhabits slow-moving waters and floodplains, surfacing regularly to breathe air using a modified swim bladder. This adaptation allows it to survive in oxygen-poor environments, where other fish would struggle, particularly during the dry season when water levels drop and decomposition reduces dissolved oxygen. Arapaima grow slowly and live for many years, reflecting the Amazon's broader pattern of longevity over speed. Their size offers protection from most predators, but it also ties them closely to stable habitats, making them sensitive to changes in water quality and fishing pressure. Electric eels occupy a different niche entirely, navigating murky waters using weak electrical fields generated by specialized organs. These fields allow them to sense objects and living creatures nearby, compensating for low visibility. When threatened or hunting, they can produce powerful electric discharges, stunning prey and deterring predators. This ability does not make them aggressive hunters roaming the river. Instead, they rely on ambush and stillness, conserving energy and striking only when conditions are right. Piranhas, often misunderstood, are another example of specialization shaped by environment rather than reputation. Most species are opportunistic feeders, consuming a mix of plant material, insects, and small animals. Their sharp teeth allow them to exploit food sources quickly, but they rarely hunt large prey. In the Amazon's crowded aquatic environment, efficiency matters more than aggression, and piranhas thrive by responding rapidly to opportunity rather than seeking conflict. Flooded forests transform these aquatic communities dramatically. During the wet season, rivers expand outward, submerging vast areas of forest floor. Trees become islands, then disappear entirely beneath the water, and fish move among trunks and branches as if swimming through a maze. This temporary expansion creates breeding grounds rich in food and shelter. Fruits and seeds fall directly into the water, providing nourishment, while submerged vegetation offers protection from predators. Many fish species time reproduction to coincide with these floods, ensuring that young hatch when resources are most abundant. As waters recede, fish retreat back into rivers and lakes, carrying with them nutrients and energy gathered from the forest. This movement links aquatic and terrestrial systems, making fish active participants in seed dispersal and nutrient cycling. Some species consume fruits and later excrete viable seeds far from parent trees, contributing to forest regeneration along riverbanks. Seasonal movement between rivers and forest is not random. Fish follow subtle gradients in water chemistry, temperature, and flow, often returning to the same areas year after year. These migrations may cover only short distances compared to oceanic fish, but within the flat Amazon basin, even small changes in elevation or connectivity can open or close routes. Channels that exist during high water may vanish entirely during the dry season, reshaping movement patterns. Fish adapt by maintaining flexibility, exploiting temporary habitats while they last, and withdrawing when conditions change. Predators adjust in parallel. River dolphins enter flooded forests to hunt fish among trees, while birds and reptiles concentrate along shrinking waterways as water levels fall. Human communities have long observed these patterns, aligning fishing practices with seasonal cycles to ensure sustainability. The abundance of fish in the Amazon is therefore not constant, but rhythmic, pulsing with the rise and fall of water. This rhythm reduces pressure on any single habitat, spreading activity across time and space. It also reinforces the importance of connectivity. Barriers that block movement, whether natural or artificial, disrupt these cycles, isolating populations and altering long-established routes. In a system built on movement, continuity matters more than abundance. Aquatic life in the Amazon reflects the same principles seen throughout the forest. Specialization allows coexistence, patience replaces speed, and survival depends on aligning life cycles with environmental rhythms rather than resisting them. Fish do not simply inhabit the rivers, they move with them, retreating, advancing, and adapting as the landscape itself shifts between land and water. Their unseen journeys sustain a hidden network beneath the surface, one that mirrors the forest above and completes the Amazon's interconnected story. As attention shifts from rivers and forests back toward the spaces in between, it becomes clear that the Amazon is not governed primarily by the animals most easily named, but by those that are most often overlooked. Insects make up the overwhelming majority of animal life here, not just in number of species but in sheer biomass. For every jaguar, tapir or eagle, there are countless insects moving through leaves, soil, bark and water, shaping the forest in ways that are constant and cumulative rather than dramatic. Their presence is so pervasive that it becomes part of the background, audible in the hums, clicks and rustling that continue day and night. Ants are among the most influential of these organisms. They occupy nearly every layer of the forest, from underground tunnels to canopy pathways formed by branches and vines. Some species live in massive colonies that function as single, distributed organisms, coordinating foraging, defense and construction with remarkable efficiency. Ants move nutrients by transporting seeds, scavenging dead material, and redistributing organic matter within the soil. Leafcutter ants, in particular, harvest vast quantities of vegetation, not to eat directly, but to cultivate fungi within their nests. These fungal gardens convert plant material into usable nutrients, and in doing so, leafcutters influence plant growth patterns, soil composition, and forest regeneration. Beetles represent another vast and varied group, occupying roles as decomposers, herbivores, predators, and pollinators. Some specialize in breaking down dead wood, accelerating the return of nutrients locked within fallen trees. Others feed on leaves, seeds, or fungi, often targeting specific plant species and thereby influencing which plants dominate certain areas. Beetles' hard exoskeletons protect them in abrasive environments, allowing them to exploit niches that would be inaccessible to softer-bodied insects. Butterflies and moths contribute differently, acting as pollinators and indicators of environmental conditions. Their life cycles often depend on specific host plants, tying their survival to the presence of particular species. Because many butterflies are sensitive to changes in humidity and temperature, shifts in their populations can signal subtle alterations in forest microclimates. Termites, though less visible, rival ants in their impact. They consume dead wood and leaf litter, breaking down material that would otherwise accumulate. In doing so, they improve soil structure, increase nutrient availability, and create microhabitats used by other organisms. Their mounds, some rising above the forest floor, regulate temperature and humidity internally, allowing colonies to function continuously despite external fluctuations. Pollination is one of the most critical services insects provide. While birds and mammals also act as pollinators, insects handle the majority of this work in the Amazon. Bees, flies, beetles, and butterflies transfer pollen between flowers, enabling reproduction across a diverse array of plant species. Many plants rely on specific insects, timing flowering to coincide with the activity patterns of their pollinators. This specialization increases efficiency, but also creates interdependence, linking the fate of plants and insects closely together. Decomposition, another essential process, relies heavily on insects working alongside fungi and bacteria. As leaves fall and animals die, insects shred organic material into smaller pieces, increasing surface area and accelerating microbial activity. This collaboration ensures that nutrients re-enter the system quickly, maintaining the rapid cycling discussed earlier. Without insects, decomposition would slow, organic matter would accumulate, and the nutrient economy of the forest would change fundamentally. Insects also act as regulators, controlling populations of plants and other animals through feeding and predation. Herbivorous, Insects influence which plant species thrive by selectively feeding on certain leaves or seeds. Predatory insects keep herbivore populations in check, preventing any one species from overwhelming the system. Parasitoid insects, whose larvae develop inside other insects, add another layer of control, often targeting the most abundant species and reducing competitive dominance. These interactions operate continuously, quietly maintaining balance without drawing attention. The sheer number of insects means that their collective impact outweighs that of larger animals, even if individual actions seem insignificant. A single ant carrying a seed may appear trivial, but multiplied millions of times across the basin, such actions shape forest composition over generations. Insects respond quickly to environmental change due to their short life cycles, making them both resilient and sensitive. They can adapt rapidly to new conditions, but they also reveal stress early, shifting abundance and behavior in ways that ripple through the ecosystem. In the Amazon, insects are not background noise. They are the mechanism through which many of the forest processes operate. They connect soil to canopy, life to decay, and plants to animals in an ongoing exchange that never pauses. Their dominance explains why the forest can function with such efficiency, despite nutrient-poor soils and constant rainfall. By working at small scales but immense numbers, insects ensure that nothing goes to waste and that energy keeps moving. Their lives unfold mostly unnoticed, yet they underpin everything described so far, forming the hidden majority that makes the Amazon not just diverse, but stable. The immense number of insects moving constantly through the forest sets the stage for a quieter truth about survival in the Amazon, one that becomes clearer the longer you observe rather than the harder you look. Predation here is shaped less by speed and spectacle, and more by patience, restraint, and an acceptance of uncertainty. Dense vegetation limits visibility to just a few meters in most places, and light fades quickly beneath the canopy, dissolving outlines and flattening depth. In this environment, long chases are inefficient and often impossible. Predators adapt by learning the forest as a three-dimensional maze, memorizing habitual paths, listening more than watching, and sensing subtle disturbances in air, water, or leaf litter. Jaguars, for example, rely heavily on ambush rather than pursuit, positioning themselves along riverbanks, game trails, or fallen logs where prey is likely to pass. Their movements are slow and deliberate, conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary noise. Every step is placed carefully, paws landing softly on moss or soil, bodies kept low to blend into shadow. Even with this precision, success is never guaranteed. Most hunts fail, not because predators lack skill, but because prey has evolved equally refined strategies for survival. Deer, peccaries, and other mammals move unpredictably, change routes frequently, and remain alert to unfamiliar sounds or scents. Many animals freeze rather than flee, trusting camouflage and stillness to erase them from notice. Energy conservation governs both sides of this relationship. In the Amazon, calories are precious. Even though the forest appears abundant, food is widely dispersed and often locked behind defenses like toxins, thorns, or tough fibers. Predators cannot afford repeated high-energy pursuits, so they wait. Ambush tactics minimize risk and maximize efficiency, allowing predators to abandon attempts quickly when conditions are not ideal. This restraint prevents overhunting and helps maintain balance between predators and prey. Smaller predators follow similar principles. Snakes, for instance, rely on camouflage and vibration sensing, remaining motionless for hours or days until prey moves within range. Frogs and lizards use quick bursts of movement rather than sustained effort, striking insects that wander too close. Birds of prey perched high in the canopy watch for subtle motion below, descending only when probability favours success. Even insects participate in this quiet calculus. Praying mantises sway gently among leaves, spiders construct webs where insect traffic is predictable, and ants coordinate group attacks that overwhelm prey through numbers rather than speed. Failure is built into the system. A predator that succeeds every time would destabilize the ecosystem, reducing prey populations and ultimately undermining its own survival. Instead, low success rates ensure that prey populations remain resilient and that predators remain selective. This balance is not enforced consciously, but emerges naturally from energy constraints and environmental complexity. Dense vegetation creates countless hiding places, escape routes, and visual obstructions, giving prey constant opportunities to avoid detection. Flooding seasons add another layer, reshaping landscapes and redistributing animals across temporary habitats, forcing predators to adapt repeatedly. Over time, this dynamic produces a steady equilibrium rather than dramatic swings. Predation in the Amazon is rarely witnessed directly because it happens quietly and quickly, often concealed by foliage or darkness. Sounds may be limited to a brief rustle or splash before stillness returns. What remains unseen is the broader effect. Populations regulated without excess, energy transferred efficiently through food webs, and behaviours refined over generations. Survival here is not about dominance but compatibility with the forest's rhythms. Predators and prey are bound together by shared limitations, each shaping the other's evolution. The forest does not reward aggression or constant motion. It favours those who can wait, adapt, and accept that uncertainty is not a flaw in the system, but one of its defining strengths. Darkness arrives quickly in the Amazon, not because the forest rushes toward night, but because the sun departs without ceremony. Within minutes of sunset, contrast drains from the landscape, and shapes lose their edges. Heat begins to leave the upper canopy first, radiating upward into open air, while the forest floor retains warmth held by soil, roots, and decomposing leaves. This creates a gentle vertical imbalance that changes how air moves. Cooler air settles downward along trunks, while warmer air rises slowly from below, carrying scent and moisture with it. Humidity increases not suddenly, but persistently, enough that exposed surfaces begin to collect a thin film of condensation. Leaves that spent the day shedding water through transpiration now hold it instead, and bark darkens as moisture returns. These physical changes set the conditions for a different kind of activity, one that depends less on sight and more on timing. The first animals to respond are often insects. Some emerge from leaf litter, others from beneath bark, and still others from burrows in soil, each group appearing according to temperature thresholds rather than light levels. Winged insects rise into the air in loose columns above clearings and rivers, drawn upward by lingering warmth. Within minutes, bats arrive, not randomly, but along routes they have flown countless times before. Their movements trace invisible corridors shaped by river edges, canopy gaps, and open water, where insects concentrate. They hunt continuously, adjusting flight paths with each echo returned to them, consuming thousands of insects in a single night without ever touching the ground. As the evening deepens, amphibians begin to announce themselves. Frogs choose calling sites with care, selecting locations where sound travels efficiently, but exposure remains low. A single call may trigger others nearby, but rarely all at once. Instead, voices overlap and separate, forming patterns that reflect distance, species, and individual spacing. These calls are not expressions of abundance but of calculation. Each frog balances the need to attract a mate against the risk of drawing predators. Calling intensifies after rain, when moisture levels allow safe movement and eggs are less likely to dry out. Reptiles respond differently. Many snakes remain still throughout the night, relying on body heat retained from the day to remain alert. Others reposition slowly, following prey trails that become easier to detect as scents linger longer in humid air. Lizards that were active during daylight retreat into crevices or beneath leaves, conserving energy rather than competing with nocturnal hunters. Mammals move cautiously. Small rodents emerge briefly to forage, stopping often to listen before crossing open ground. Larger mammals shift location without drawing attention, using the cover of darkness to move between feeding areas and resting sites. Along rivers, eyes appear first, reflecting faint, light as caimans surface just enough to breathe and assess movement at the water's edge. Fish activity increases near the surface as insects fall into the water, creating brief feeding opportunities that ripple outward in widening circles. Sound becomes the dominant sense, but it is not uniform. The forest at night is structured acoustically, with each species occupying a narrow range of frequencies. Low insect drones form a continuous background, broken by sharper signals that indicate movement or contact. A branch snapping does not echo. It is absorbed almost immediately, forcing listeners to rely on memory rather than reverberation. Animals learn which sounds belong and which do not. Familiar rhythms are ignored, while unfamiliar disruptions prompt stillness rather than flight. This selective attention reduces unnecessary movement and preserves energy. Temperature continues to decline gradually, but never enough to disrupt activity. Unlike temperate forests, night in the Amazon does not bring cold stress. Instead, it brings stability. Evaporation slows, water remains available on surfaces, and respiration continues at a steady pace. Some flowers open only now, releasing scents that travel farther in cool, humid air. Moths arrive first, followed by bats that pollinate while feeding. These interactions happen without spectacle, repeated nightly in the same locations, maintaining plant reproduction without drawing attention. As midnight approaches, activity does not peak but redistributes. Some insects retreat, others replace them. Predators remain alert but do not increase effort. The forest settles into a sustained equilibrium, where movement continues without escalation. Just before dawn, temperatures reach their lowest point, and sound thins slightly as some nocturnal species retreat, and diurnal ones prepare to return. Moisture remains suspended in the air, ready to be lifted again by the first light. Night in the Amazon is therefore not defined by darkness alone, but by a reorganization of priorities. Energy is conserved, risk is managed, and life proceeds without urgency. Nothing here suggests drama or danger unless it is forced. Instead, night reinforces the same principle that governs the forest by day. Survival favors those who move only when necessary, respond to conditions rather than resist them, and understand that stability comes not from stillness, but from continuous, measured adjustment. For as long as the forest has maintained its cycles of rain, growth, and decay, human life has existed within it, not as a recent intrusion, but as a long-term presence shaped by the same constraints and opportunities as every other organism. Archaeological evidence shows that people have lived in the Amazon for thousands of years, adapting to its rhythms rather than attempting to override them. These societies did not experience the forest as an untouched wilderness or an overwhelming obstacle. but as a living environment that could be read, learned, and participated in. Settlement patterns followed rivers and seasonal floodplains, where movement was easiest and resources renewed themselves predictably. Communities learned to position themselves where water rose and fell without destroying homes, where soils could be enriched gradually, and where food sources appeared in reliable sequences rather than constant abundance. Over generations, this knowledge accumulated not as written instruction, but as practice, observation, and memory passed from one person to another. Sustainable land use emerged not from ideology, but from necessity. Clearing forest entirely was rarely advantageous because exposed soil lost fertility quickly. Instead, small-scale clearing, selective harvesting, and controlled burning were used to encourage useful plants without disrupting larger systems. Forest gardens developed in which fruit trees, medicinal plants, and edible roots grew alongside wild vegetation, creating landscapes that appeared natural to outsiders but were carefully shaped over time. These practices increased biodiversity rather than reducing it, providing habitat for animals while supplying food for humans. Soil was enriched using organic waste, charcoal, and plant matter, creating fertile patches that remained productive for decades. These dark, nutrient-rich soils, still visible today, testify to long-term human influence that worked with ecological processes rather than against them. Traditional ecological knowledge extended far beyond farming. Indigenous communities learned to recognize subtle changes in animal behavior, water levels, and plant health, using these signals to anticipate floods, droughts, or shifts in food availability. Hunting practices were governed by timing and restraint. Animals were taken when populations could sustain loss, and hunting pressure moved across territories to prevent depletion. Fishing followed seasonal cycles, targeting species during periods of abundance and allowing stocks to recover. This was not conservation as an abstract principle, but as lived experience shaped by direct dependence on local ecosystems. Human life was woven into food webs through participation rather than control. People acted as predators, seed dispersers, and ecosystem engineers, influencing forest structure in ways that often increased resilience. Cultural practices reinforced these relationships. Stories, rituals, and taboos encoded environmental knowledge, guiding behavior without the need for formal enforcement. Certain areas were left untouched, others visited only at specific times, creating a mosaic of use and rest that mirrored natural cycles. Knowledge of medicinal plants allowed communities to treat illness using resources gathered sustainably, reducing pressure on any single species. Even movement through the forest followed established paths that minimized disturbance and avoided sensitive habitats. This long-term coexistence challenges the idea that human presence inevitably leads to degradation. Instead, it reveals that impact depends on scale, intention, and feedback. Indigenous societies remained small relative to the forest, and their survival depended on maintaining conditions that would continue to support life. Changes were observed immediately and corrected quickly, because consequences were local and personal. This feedback loop prevented the accumulation of damage. Human activity became another variable in the ecosystem, influencing outcomes without overwhelming them. The forest responded not by retreating, but by incorporating human actions into its ongoing processes. When villages were abandoned, gardens reverted gradually to forest, enriched by introduced species and altered soils. Animal populations adjusted to new patterns of disturbance and refuge. Over time, these interactions blurred the line between natural and cultural landscapes. understanding human life in the Amazon therefore requires abandoning the idea of separation. People here were not outside observers or conquerors of nature. They were participants shaped by the same limitations of energy, movement, and time as every other species. Their tools, languages, and social structures evolved in response to humidity, seasonal flooding, dense vegetation, and dispersed resources. Human rhythms aligned with daylight, rainfall, and river levels, reinforcing the broader stability of the system. This perspective reframes the forest not as a place untouched by humans, but as one where long-term human presence contributed to its diversity and resilience. It also provides insight into what allows systems to endure. Stability arises when use is balanced by renewal, when knowledge is localized, and when actions are constrained by immediate consequences. Indigenous life in the Amazon demonstrates that human existence need not stand apart from ecological processes, but can function as one expression of them, embedded within the same slow-moving story that has unfolded across the basin for millennia. The long continuity between forest processes and human presence begins to change noticeably when the pace of interaction accelerates beyond the rhythms the ecosystem evolved to absorb. Modern human impact in the Amazon is not defined only by what happens, but by how quickly it happens and how widely its effects spread. For most of its history, the forest responded to disturbance slowly and locally. A tree fell, a gap opened, light reached the ground, and growth followed. A village shifted location, gardens reverted to forest, and animal populations adjusted over generations. These changes unfolded within feedback loops that allowed recovery. Modern activities operate differently. Roads cut across watersheds in straight lines, rather than following contours, breaking the continuity that rivers and animal paths once maintained. Logging removes not just individual trees but structural anchors of the canopy, altering light, wind, and moisture far beyond the cleared area. Agriculture replaces diverse plant communities with uniform crops that depend on external inputs rather than internal recycling. Fire, once rare and contained by humidity, becomes more frequent and persistent when forest cover is reduced, drying edges and allowing flames to move where they could not before. Each of these actions fragments habitat, not only physically but functionally. Species adapted to continuous forest find movement more difficult, breeding grounds become isolated, and microclimates shift at newly exposed edges. Deforestation rarely advances evenly. It spreads in patterns shaped by access, economics, and policy, often radiating outward from roads or rivers. This creates mosaics of cleared land, secondary growth, and remaining forest, each with different ecological properties. Edges increase dramatically, and with them come changes in temperature, humidity, and species composition. Trees near edges experience more wind stress and higher mortality. Insects and plants adapted to disturbance move in, while interior species retreat or disappear. These effects propagate inward, meaning that the impact of a cleared area extends far beyond its visible boundary. The speed of modern environmental change presents a particular challenge. Forest systems that evolved to respond over centuries are now asked to adapt over decades or even years. Nutrient cycles struggle to keep pace when vegetation is removed faster than it can regrow. Soil, once protected by canopy and litter, is exposed to intense rainfall and sunlight, losing fertility rapidly. Rivers respond to altered land cover with changes in sediment load and flow patterns, affecting fish breeding grounds and floodplain dynamics described earlier. Wildlife responds first through behavior, avoiding disturbed areas, then through population decline when avoidance is no longer possible. These changes are often subtle at first, detectable only through long-term observation, but they accumulate steadily. Fire illustrates how multiple pressures interact. In intact forest, moisture levels and lack of fuel continuity prevent large fires. When forest is fragmented, edges dry out, dead wood accumulates, and intentional burns used for clearing can escape into adjacent areas. Each fire weakens the forest further, killing trees not adapted to heat and opening space for grasses that carry fire more readily. This feedback loop can shift forest toward a different state, one less capable of supporting the biodiversity and climate regulation described earlier. Roads amplify these processes by increasing access. They facilitate logging, settlement, and agriculture, but they also alter animal movement and water flow. Some species avoid roads entirely, while others are attracted to edges, increasing predation or human conflict. Streams crossing roads are diverted or dammed, changing local hydrology. Noise and light penetrate deeper into the forest than physical clearing alone, reshaping behavior patterns established over millennia. The ecological consequences are not uniform. Some species decline rapidly, others adapt or even expand. Generalists capable of using disturbed habitats may increase, while specialists disappear. This shifts community composition, often reducing overall diversity even when total biomass appears stable. Pollination networks weaken when key insect or bird species are lost. Seed dispersal patterns change, favouring plants that tolerate disturbance over those that require intact forest. These changes feed back into forest structure, influencing regeneration and long-term stability. What distinguishes modern impact from earlier human influence is not intention, but scale and disconnection. Actions are often driven by distant demands rather than local feedback. Consequences unfold far from decision-making centres, delaying recognition and response. The forest no longer has time to incorporate disturbance into its cycles gradually. Instead, it is forced to absorb multiple pressures simultaneously, each reinforcing the others. Understanding this does not require viewing the Amazon as fragile in a simplistic sense. The forest is resilient within certain bounds, capable of recovery when given time and continuity. The challenge arises when thresholds are crossed faster than biological processes can respond. Modern human impact therefore represents a shift not in kind but in tempo. It compresses centuries of change into decades, overwhelming systems designed for patience rather than speed. This context sets the stage for considering not only what is being lost, but what conditions are required for the forest to continue functioning as the integrated system described throughout this story. Even after centuries of exploration, observation and measurement, the Amazon remains only partially understood, not because it resists study, but because its complexity exceeds the pace and scale at which understanding can accumulate. New species continue to be identified every year, sometimes large and conspicuous, more often small, cryptic, or easily mistaken for known forms. Insects lead this category by an enormous margin, with countless species likely remaining undocumented simply because they occupy narrow niches or appear only briefly during specific conditions. Microorganisms add another layer of invisibility. Bacteria, fungi, and single-celled organisms drive nutrient cycling, soil formation, and plant health, yet many have never been isolated or described. Even among plants and vertebrates, genetic analysis frequently reveals hidden diversity, showing that what was once considered a single widespread species is actually several distinct lineages with different ecological roles. These discoveries do not arrive dramatically. They accumulate slowly, expanding the edges of knowledge without ever closing the gap entirely. Complex ecological interactions pose an even greater challenge. The Amazon functions through countless relationships that are indirect, delayed, or conditional. A change in one population may not produce immediate visible effects, but instead ripple outward over years, altering competition, reproduction, and movement in subtle ways. For example, the loss of a particular insect pollinator may not reduce plant abundance right away, but it can change which individuals reproduce, gradually shifting genetic composition. Altered fruiting patterns then affect animals that rely on those fruits, influencing migration, breeding success, and predator-prey dynamics. These cascading effects are difficult to trace because they unfold across multiple spatial and temporal scales. Controlled experiments, a cornerstone of scientific understanding, are often impractical or impossible in such a vast and interconnected system. Researchers must rely on observation, modeling, and comparison rather than manipulation, which limits certainty. The limits of scientific research are also shaped by access. Large portions of the Amazon remain remote, seasonally inaccessible, or politically restricted. Even where access exists, long-term monitoring is difficult to sustain. Funding cycles are short relative to ecological timescales, and research stations may operate for decades only to close abruptly. Data gaps emerge not from lack of interest, but from logistical reality. Weather, flooding, and equipment failure interrupt measurements. Human disturbance alters sites before baseline conditions are fully documented. As a result, many conclusions are drawn from partial records, snapshots rather than continuous histories. This uncertainty is not a weakness of science, but a reflection of the system being studied. The Amazon is not static. It changes, slowly but constantly, responding to internal dynamics and external pressures. Separating natural variability from long-term trends requires data sets that span generations, something only recently becoming possible in a few locations. Even then, interpreting change requires assumptions about what constitutes a stable baseline in a system that has never been truly fixed. Understanding remains difficult because the forest operates through integration rather than isolation. Processes described earlier, such as rainfall recycling, nutrient cycling, and species interactions, do not function independently. They overlap, reinforce, and sometimes counteract one another. A model that explains one pattern well may fail when applied elsewhere because local conditions alter outcomes. What holds true along one river may not apply to another with different soil chemistry, flood timing, or species composition. This variability resists simplification. It forces scientists to think in terms of probabilities rather than certainties, ranges rather than single values. There is also the challenge of scale. Satellite imagery reveals broad patterns of vegetation and change, but misses fine-scale interactions beneath the canopy. Ground-based studies capture detail but cover limited areas. Bridging these scales requires assumptions that are difficult to test directly. New technologies, such as remote sensors, genetic sampling, and automated recording devices, are expanding what can be observed, but they also generate volumes of data that take years to analyze and interpret. Each advance answers some questions while revealing new ones. Perhaps the most important limitation lies not in tools or access, but in perspective. Human understanding tends to favor linear cause and effect relationships, while the Amazon operates through networks and feedback loops. Effects may be delayed, distributed, or dependent on thresholds that are crossed gradually. This makes it hard to predict outcomes, with confidence, especially under changing conditions. Scientists increasingly recognize that uncertainty is not something to eliminate, but something to account for explicitly. The forest teaches patience in this way. It reveals that knowledge can deepen without ever becoming complete, and that responsible action does not always require total understanding. Acknowledging what remains unknown is itself a form of insight, one that encourages caution, humility, and continued observation. In the Amazon, mystery is not a gap to be filled quickly, but a space that persists even as understanding grows, reminding us that the system is larger, slower, and more intricate than any single explanation can capture. What emerges after considering what is still unknown is not a sense of fragility alone, but a clearer picture of how the Amazon continues to function as a living system precisely because it is never still. Growth, decay, and regeneration do not occur in neat sequence, but overlap constantly, creating a landscape where loss and renewal are always happening at the same time in different places. A tree falls, and light reaches the ground, triggering a surge of growth that had been waiting quietly for years. Leaves decay and release nutrients that are absorbed almost immediately by roots and fungi. Animals move through these changes without reacting to them as events, because for the forest they are not interruptions but the normal state of affairs. Stability here does not mean preservation of form, it means persistence of process. The forest remains recognizable not because individual components last forever, but because the rules governing their replacement remain consistent. Recovery after disturbance follows this logic. When storms, floods, or localized fires alter parts of the forest, regrowth begins almost immediately, though not always in the same configuration. Pioneer plants colonize open space, soil organisms increase activity, and animals adjust their movement to new conditions. Over time, species composition shifts again, favoring longer-lived trees and more complex structure. This recovery is rarely rapid by human standards, but it is reliable when the surrounding system remains intact. What matters most is continuity. Where seed sources, water cycles, and soil processes remain connected, regeneration follows predictable pathways. Where those connections are broken, recovery slows or stalls. This distinction highlights an important aspect of the Amazon's resilience. It is not infinite, but it is durable when change remains within the bounds the system evolved to accommodate. Constant change is not a threat here. It is the mechanism by which balance is maintained. Rivers shift channels, forests rearrange their layers, populations rise and fall, yet the system as a whole continues to operate. This dynamic equilibrium depends on feedback loops that correct extremes. Too much growth increases competition, slowing expansion. Too much decay releases nutrients that fuel new life. Predators regulate prey, insects regulate plants, plants regulate climate. None of these interactions aim for equilibrium in a static sense. Instead, they create a moving center, a range within which variation is absorbed rather than amplified. This is why the forest can appear chaotic at close range and stable at larger scales. Observers come and go, but the processes continue without reference to observation. Trees grow whether they are measured or not. Rivers flood and recede regardless of mapping. Animals adjust their behavior without signaling change. Much of what happens in the Amazon is invisible, not because it is hidden, but because it unfolds at scales of time and space that do not demand attention. The forest does not perform its functions in response to external acknowledgement. It simply continues, shaped by physics, chemistry, biology, and history. This continuity extends beyond human lifespans and even beyond the lifespan of individual species. Lineages emerge, diversify, and disappear, while the underlying system persists. Understanding the Amazon as an ongoing living system therefore requires shifting focus away from endpoints. There is no final state toward which the forest moves, no moment when it becomes complete or finished. Its identity lies in motion, in the repetition of cycles that are never identical but always related. This perspective alters how change is interpreted. Instead of asking whether the forest will remain the same, a more meaningful question is whether the processes that allow renewal will remain functional. As long as water can move, nutrients can cycle, and organisms can interact across connected landscapes, the system retains the capacity to reorganize. When those processes are interrupted, continuity is threatened not immediately but cumulatively. The Amazon story does not conclude with certainty or resolution. It extends forward, shaped by forces already in motion and by choices that influence how much time and space the system has to adjust. What can be said with confidence is that the forest is not a static backdrop or a fragile relic. It is an active, adaptive system that has endured immense change before and continues to function in the present. Its future depends less on preserving exact forms than on maintaining the conditions that allow change to remain generative rather than destructive. Beyond observation, beyond measurement, the forest continues its work, assembling and reassembling itself, sustaining life through processes that are slow, interconnected, and largely indifferent to whether they are being watched